We've done it. We've made it to the most important time in 2024, astrologically. It's going to be wild. I'm Bryan Colter. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and here's my take on the Great American Eclipse. What makes this eclipse so powerful, other than the fact that it's a total solar eclipse, is that it coincides with two other major astrological events, one of which is the Saturn-Mars conjunction, and the other one is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Now, if any of these events were happening alone, we could spend the whole video talking about them. They're that big, but they're all happening at the same time. So this will probably be a little bit longer of a video because there's a lot to unpack here. Our understanding of the solar eclipse is inseparable from our understanding of the two other events. And as we look at them all, tie them together, we can have a very comprehensive view of what the energy is presenting to us as a collective, how we can work with it on an individual level. With evolutionary astrology, we want to go far beyond, the predictive side of astrology, which is real and valid, to how can I work with this on a personal level? How can I work with these energies, go with the grain instead of against it for my own wisdom-inducing experiences towards my goal of raising my consciousness? That's going to be our primary focus. With all that being said, let's go ahead and bring up the chart. As you can see here, we have this beautiful solar eclipse happening at 19.5 degrees of Aries. Significantly, we have Chiron, as you can see, in an exact conjunction with this eclipse. So this is a very chironic solar eclipse, if you will. We'll have to unpack that. We also have the Mars-Saturn conjunction happening in Pisces, and then the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction happening in Taurus. So we're going to have to look at all these, but let's just start with the eclipse. The eclipse happens technically on April 8th. We're already feeling the energy of this eclipse now. We will continue to feel it really strong for the 2 weeks after, and then it will ripple out until the next eclipse season towards the end of this year. So it really has this 6th-month wave, even though it literally happens on April 8th, but that's when the energy is certainly strongest. And it's called the Great American Eclipse because it's happening over America. And wherever the eclipse happens, where, the solar eclipse, the sky goes dark temporarily, where that happens on Earth is where the energy will be at peak, be at maximum. So it'll be very interesting to see over the coming weeks what occurs in America. But make no mistake about it, this is affecting the whole globe in a significant way. Symbolically, solar eclipse represent a moment of darkness followed by illumination and revelation. And a useful way to think about this eclipse is it's going to trigger, there's a lot of triggering influences in the sky right now, trigger a hard reset or reboot in this timeline that we find ourselves in. Way back in the day in my old career, I started a computer business. I was an IT technician. The name of my business was Computer Care. Oh, that's so sweet. But I took care of computers. And computer techies have lingo. And when I talked to my colleagues and we're talking about how to troubleshoot whatever the problem was we were experiencing with the network or with the computer, one of the first things we try is to turn it off and turn it on. By doing that hard reboot, you will often, not always, but often fix the issues. It just needed a quick reset. And the lingo we used was power cycle because we wanted it to sound more important than it was. It's like, oh, have you tried a power cycle? Oh, yes, I already tried that. Thanks. So, yeah, power cycle could be a useful way of looking at this solar eclipse. It's time to hit the reset button on this current timeline that we're in so that we can co-create a better timeline. And eclipses are classical for deeply transformative experiences that put us on a new trajectory, hopefully a more optimal trajectory. But how optimal or horrific that new timeline can be depends on the choices we make as a collective, of course, and our average level of human consciousness that we're experiencing on the planet at that time. So solar eclipses are connected to transformation and change, usually bring about rather unexpected events. And actually, this is the common ingredient creating a powerful theme between this eclipse and the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction, because Uranus is often seen that way as well. The cliche I use for Uranus commonly is expect the unexpected. You could use that cliche for eclipses as well. So unexpected events that happen to us that invite us, or sometimes feel like forces us to confront issues and to break free from self-limiting patterns. Again, it feels like a deeply catalytic impact that we're about to experience that can lead to great pockets of personal growth and self-discovery, deeply transformational energy. You want to pay close attention to where you have about 19.5 degrees of Aries in your own personal chart, because that means the eclipse will be activating a particular area of your chart. If you don't know how to find 19 degrees of Aries, I'm sure you can find guides out there online. If you want to work with me, I do sell a 40-minute tutorial. I'll put a link above. But educating yourself around how to navigate your own chart and understanding where these events are happening in your chart is very useful, because, for example, you might have this solar eclipse happening in your 7th house, like it's showing here in this random sky chart. This is connected to intimacy, to marriage, to the inner concentric rings of your close relationships. So the potential for great change and transformation in that area of your life is far greater during this time. So this allows you to add another specific layer of insight into how you can work with this event proactively in your own life. Because you, at least having that conscious awareness, it's like, oh, it's in my 7th house, for example, really helps you to be aware about that area of your life and how to change it for the better. Now, since this eclipse is happening in the sign of Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac, it will often trigger new beginnings and circumstances which require you to have some initiative and sort of like a go-getter energy, because Aries is the warrior and the pioneer. It is a symbol of action and of fire and of courage and bravery. So again, look to the house it's in. Where can I create a new beginning, or where do I need to be more proactive in my life? So a good evolutionary question to ask yourself during the solar eclipse is, are there any seeds of potential that have been lying dormant within me? And what actions can I take to bring them to life during this power cycle period? Now, this is happening again right next to Chiron, the wounded healer. The positive expression of this process of transformation, new beginnings, initiative, aim in this direction of how can I use my own knowledge that I've gained through my own traumas and woundedness. I mean, we're all wounded somehow, and turn that outwardly into some role to help or be for the benefit of others. And that can be a healing action during this time. The shadow or dark side of this is, because we're all wounded somehow, if we're not seeking to use that wisdom we gain through those traumas for good, of course, the woundedness can, especially during stressful experiences, and I do think the collective energy of these category of events is rather intense. It can bring about stress based on what we perceive and experience. And if we're deeply traumatized and we're not working with it proactively towards healing and healing others, we can get into this more sort of traumatized reactive state where we act from fear or anger or rage or grief or whatever it is, instead of this more empowered state of how can I use this for good. Now let's tie in this very important Saturn-Mars conjunction. First, I want to say Mars rules Aries. Rulership just means affinity with. So the planet of Mars, the war god, has a strong affinity with Aries, the warrior, the pioneer. As I introduced, there is distinctions between them, but so much overlap in meaning it creates a big bonfire of a theme here. Strong warrior energy in the sky right now. Now, these two planets have a bad reputation in astrology. The ancient astrologers called them the two malefics. Mars, the lesser malefic, Saturn, the greater malefic. Here they are holding hands in the sky. Many astrologers throughout history read these two planets coming together in a very doom and gloom way. Fair enough. Through the power of observation, looking back over many, many centuries, when these two big baddies come together, it does tend to trigger some rather difficult situations in people's personal lives and certainly amongst the collective, okay? So these are experienced commonly as a very stressful set of energies. We could associate the stress and hardship and challenge in words like these to both Mars and Saturn. And Mars being a planet of action, Saturn being this mountain of an energy that doesn't like to move, likes to slow things down, likes to create challenges. You know, we have this energy of Mars and Saturn coming together. It's like an unstoppable breeze meeting up against a unyielding mountain, for example. So there is, the car accelerating at 100 miles an hour and doing the crash dummy test of hitting the wall. That's what these planets can feel like sometimes. The last time these two planets came together was right as the lockdowns were initiated. There were the governments of the world making a collective decision to be martial in the sense of being proactive and forceful, making a Saturnian decision of discernment that had great levels of control on everybody. And it is a very repressive force, and it can feel that, hence the greater malefics. Everything in astrology happens because it needs to. Everything represents an evolutionary opportunity, and that includes when the malefics hold hands in the sky. And I admit, these aren't my favorite planets to be working with in my own personal life, and that's because they do tend to create great challenges, okay? But that's not to say that there isn't a very powerful, life-enhancing outcome that you can experience working with these planets with conscious awareness instead of them flowing through your life randomly or haphazardly. In the wise words of G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle, so knowing this event is happening and then asking yourself the question, well, how can I work with it for my own betterment and evolution? And yes, although these planets feel uncomfortable often, the level at which and the speed at which we can grow through them is substantially increased because there is a great benefit of facing a great challenge. And that benefit is wisdom and maturation gained, as well as martial courage and bravery. That's the holy grail of navigating Saturn-Mars. And that's a good title to give this event. Is it time for me to rise to a challenge? These planets don't like procrastination. Mars certainly doesn't like procrastination. It's always moving forward like a warrior, charging into battle. Let's get things done. Saturn, too, is about getting things done, things that we might be delaying. Saturn represents the capacity to do things that we just don't feel like doing. For example, a lot of people don't like doing their taxes, and here we are in tax season during the Mars-Saturn conjunction. Perfect timing. Here's another one. I don't really enjoy going to the dentist, but I need to, otherwise my teeth are going to fall out of my head, So me going to the dentist and doing what I don't enjoy is a Saturn activity. And if I don't go to the dentist, I will pay the consequences. That is Saturn's promise. It's the cosmic paycheck. I reap what I sow. So it's much better to do the things that are difficult, and with Mars and Saturn, to try to ferret out where you might be procrastinating somewhere in your life. Is there something I've put on the back burner that's now time for me to do? That's a good question to ask yourself during this time. Now, what's interesting is these two planets are in the sign of Pisces, which is the classic mystic archetype, which really brings to the forefront this idea of the archetype of the spiritual warrior. So you have this imagery that we're working with, spiritual evolution through Pisces, Mars the warrior, Saturn represents a challenge or a mountain to climb. The prize at the top is great wisdom and maturation, as well as the martial bravery and courage to do something we might be procrastinating about or have some fear with. But let's invoke a different archetype, kind of blending and fusing these all together. Think of the free soloist rock climbers. I used a rendition on the thumbnail of this video of El Capitan Mountain there in California. I grew up in California, so it's a mountain I'm familiar with, at least looking at. I've never climbed the damn thing. I haven't even climbed Half Dome, and that's, wussy in comparison. But think of a free soloist rock climber who doesn't have any safety gear. They're just climbing up the mountain, just very death-defying thing. I would imagine that they don't have the luxury to freak out or to panic when they're halfway up the mountain. They have to stay in this utterly detached flow state, detached observation. It's a very spiritual experience or meditative experience for them, I would imagine. I've never talked to one. But not only are they forced, otherwise they die, they're forced to be in this meditative state or flow state to climb that mountain. And I would imagine I can't even imagine really the gratification, the joy that they feel after accomplishing such a feat. And I would imagine it's also kind of blissful or euphoric, kind of like a runner's high, if you will. So we look at the free soloist on the mountain, and from my perspective, I consider them a mystic. Clearly, they're an athlete, they've got strong warrior energy, but there's a spiritual component to what they're doing, whether or not they really realize that or recognize it, although I've heard, interviews where they do point to this idea that it can be literally a spiritual experience. I love the archetype of the free soloist when we're considering Saturn conjunct Mars in the sign of the mystic. So as we take these understandings of these planets and we translate it to some core evolutionary questions you can ask yourself, it would be along the lines of, is there a challenge or an obstacle that I've been avoiding? That's a good place to start. Do I have the courage to confront it now so that I can emerge stronger? These are great questions, spiritual warrior questions. What free soloist within me needs to be cultivated? And what skills or resources do I need to develop to navigate any difficult decisions that present themselves to me within the state of focus and flow? The adversity comes, climbing the mountain with no safety gear. The adversity comes, can I remain in the flow state or the meditative state? Okay. Not from a place of wounded warrior reactivity, the chironic elements of this, but rather from this higher level of consciousness of the spiritual warrior. No matter what challenges or mountains to climb that come to me, I can enter into that flow state. That's a beautiful evolutionary intention. Now, on the topic of the mystic, as many of you know, I just started a new YouTube channel. It's called Meditation Nexus. And I have a meditation that I just released that's perfect for this Aries, Mars, and Pisces energy. It's called Warrior Mode. So I'll put a link to the guided meditation above if you want to check it out and subscribe to my new channel. This would be a perfect meditation to practice, certainly during the eclipse itself, but really throughout the entirety of this Aries season until the sun goes into Taurus in a couple weeks. Now, last but certainly not least, we have the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction. You could really argue this is the strongest of the three because this only happens once every 14 years. And it's been active for a few months now. It's very strong. As you can see, they're only 2 degrees apart. And Jupiter is catching up with Uranus so quickly that this conjunction will be exact on April 20th. So it's basically at peak now. It will continue until the middle of May. So thinking about, okay, how can I work with Jupiter Uranus from now until the middle of May is one of the most important things to be aware of astrologically. So I talked a little bit about this event in the last video, and I'll repeat a little of that here, although I'm also going to introduce some new concepts with it. Let's start this time with the tension between these two planets, because they are very, very different from each other. And Jupiter, on one level, is about power, is about success. It's known as the planet of good fortune and luck. You know, to the old astrologers, if they were to look at somebody's personal chart that had, for example, like a Sun-Jupiter conjunction, the prediction would be power, honor, and glory and riches will be yours. You know, there was that mystique about strong Jupiter people because it's the king of the gods. It represents king energy. And Jupiter people do tend to magnetize success into their life. We see it a lot. Chart that comes to mind who has a strong king energy or Jupiter energy in their chart is Joe Rogan. He has a Jupiter-Sun conjunction in Leo, if I'm remembering correctly. And even Leo is associated with king. King of the beasts, Jupiter's the king of the gods. He has them both really strong. You know, he's the king of podcasting, for example. So, yeah, Jupiter does connect with this idea of the successful in life, and we can apply that idea to monetary success. Of course, there's many ways to be successful and to perceive what success is. But let's just say Jupiter does represent the 1%, the top 1% of people. Now, Uranus, on the other hand, known as the revolutionary, the criminal, that which seeks to oppose the powerful. Okay, so it's a natural rule breaker energy because it's the engine that drives social change. It's the ability to think outside the box, to think ahead of your time so we can innovate into a new future, one that is more fair, you know, where there's not such a stark polarity between the haves and the have-nots, if you will. So there's a natural tension between these two planets. Jupiter represents the powerful, Uranus represents the disempowered. So look to see for these themes over the next weeks if there's any major developments. One that came to mind for me was about Julian Assange. He classically rebelled against the system by releasing all those documents. He popped into my head today as I was preparing for this video. I was like, oh, I wonder what his chart's like. Well, sure enough, he's got a really strong Uranus in his chart. It's in its own house, the 11th house. It's in a tight square to his sun. He even has Mars in Aquarius, which is the rebel warrior energy. His chart's super fascinating. It's the first time I ever saw it. If you're interested in analyzing his chart on this channel, let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to do that. But yeah, I'd be interested to see if there's any developments with him during this time, because he released all those documents, at least the ones connected to the Iraq war, the ones that got him in hot water. He released those in April, in I think it was October of 2010, during the last Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So he, on a personal level, deeply and energetically is resonant with the archetype of Uranus. And therefore, he's also very sensitive to this specific event. So that was the last cycle when he released that, and then his subsequent arrest. And now, seeing if there's any developments there. So just keep your eyes peeled. Again, that's predictive astrology stuff, but he is a nice representation of what I'm talking about here, the natural tension between Jupiter and Uranus. Those who seek to rebel against a system that is struggling because of the disparity between those who are greatly successful and those who are not. That's the primary motivation, the tension underlying that rebellion. Let's introduce another wrinkle with these planets by speaking of the polarity of them individually. So, for example, Jupiter, that strong king energy or queen energy, high-end Jupiter is the king in triumph, the successful king, the benefic king, that which expands, which is lucky, okay, who triumphs. The shadow side of a Jupiter response is prideful overextension because of ego inflation. One of my favorite examples for this is General Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. When he died, that prideful overextension, dark side Jupiter, happened during a Jupiter-Uranus square. Okay, so there was that stimulus in the air then, so to speak. But then Custer himself was a double Sag. He had Sun and Moon in Sag. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. He also had Jupiter trine Uranus in his birth chart. And he was vulnerable to the Sagittarian/Jupiterian prideful overextension. But on the flip side of the coin, he was also very lucky, which probably led to him overextending himself. He probably felt himself to be invincible. In fact, people called him Lucky Custer because he survived for so long through all those battles. He had something like 11 horses that were shot out from underneath him. So Uranus is linked to, again, and the solar eclipse, both of these are linked to sudden, unexpected events. And we tie this in with this Jupiter King energy. We could be looking at the symbolism of the sudden downfall of the king. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. We may be looking at, especially in politics, because this is probably one of the most important and impactful political years for humanity, because there's so many elections happening in so many countries this year. And we can use this king energy as well as the people who are Jupiterian, successful, the 1%ers, all the chaos that's going to happen through all this change of power and the voting leading up to that. It'll be interesting to see in April if anything major happens, politically speaking, linked to this idea of the sudden downfall of the king, because this imagery is very, very strong right now. So there's a polarity of working with Jupiter. It's like, okay, am I going to become the king in triumph or prideful overextension? What about Uranus? Uranus, the planet of revolutionary ideas. Well, not all revolutionary ideas are good ones. Some can lead to another Uranian thing, which is utter disruption and chaos. Now, this, the disempowered versus the powerful is an archetypal battle that's very popular in mythology. The classic one is, Luke Skywalker blowing up the Death Star to the detriment of the Empire. Or, Robin Hood. My wife was just watching the Russell Crowe version of Robin Hood the other night. I was checking it out. So Robin Hood, fighting against the powerful sheriff of Nottingham. So, we see this in literature all the time. And it's this archetypal tension that is very activated during this month of April. So look for king in triumph, look for prideful overextension happening, look for really good revolutionary ideas and potentially very chaotic and disruptive ones becoming really in our face over the next few weeks. Now, I shared this in the last video. I want to introduce this again, because in my opinion, this is the most powerful way of working with Jupiter, Uranus on a personal level. Although, as we can see, these two planets are so different from each other, what they have in common is they're both future-oriented. Jupiter, much like Sagittarian energy, keeps one's eyes on the horizon line in a very hopeful, optimistic state of mind, wanting to expand optimistically in a better future, to co-create that. It's the symbol of faith and hope and belief. And then also Uranus is about untying the shackles that bind, going more towards freedom, rebellion that's seeking freedom, so that we can create a future that is more independent and free and sovereign, to where we can have a system that's more decentralized instead of centralized control, so that we can create a happy future, as well as the innovative, inventive, genius ideas of Uranus that evolve society. But both these planets, this is where they meet in the center of the Venn diagram. They're both future-oriented. So this is a perfect time. The eclipse, even Mars-Saturn, Jupiter-Uranus, it's time to create this like grand vision quest for a better future, not only for yourself, but for the collective, to create that big, bold vision. And really powerful evolutionary questions to ask yourself related to this event is, what is my unique contribution to a better future? How can I use my grand vision quest to inspire positive change? That's another good question. Jupiter, how to work with this through the evolutionary lens is to ask yourself the question, how am I underestimating myself? So we apply it here to, how am I underestimating my grand vision quest? My dream needs to become more pipe-like, more of a pipe dream. Make it as beautiful and miraculous as you can. And we tie it into all this martial warrior action energy. It's like, okay, first part of the question is, how am I underestimating my grand vision quest? How can I claim more regarding that big dream? But then with the warrior energy, the follow-up question is, and what actions can I take towards that future? Actions that scream, I'm worth it. I'm worth it is a Jupiter statement, a proclamation. And to make those big, bold actions towards that better future will help to bump you onto that timeline. So much action, energy in the air. Sure, this is going to be very intense in the sense of world events that occur. I'd be very surprised if at the end of April, like nothing happened. I would be very surprised. We're probably going to see quite a few big events occur over the coming weeks. And amidst all that which happens, the Saturn-Mars stress-based events that occur, again, the triggering influence of the war god careening into the mountain, the immovable force of Saturn that wants to slow things down, can feel a bit train wreckish. But how we respond to that train wreck is our choice. Will we confront it as the free soloist, facing great adversity in the flow state, or will we crumble into the wounded warrior who gets into this more reactive, dramatic state of stress-based consciousness, which is very damaging to one's own personal psyche, but then also the people around us? And if we get distracted to reactivity of the wounded warrior, then we won't have the clarity of mind to even focus and concentrate on what that big, bold vision is and create the actions towards achieving those goals. These are the core evolutionary intentions, with the goal being to expand our consciousness.